Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us today. In just a few minutes, we're going to get started, but first I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. Everyone has been muted. If you have a question, please ask it in the question window of the GoToWebinar application. We will try to get to every question either individually or aloud during the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. Once the presentation begins, sometimes people have issues seeing the slides advance. If this happens to you, please just close the webinar and rejoin. That usually fixes things. Finally, we are recording today's session and we'll share the link with you after the webinar. It usually takes about a week for it to be posted to YouTube. All right, and with that, let's get started. Joining us today is John Vogt and Dalit Berkey, both Senior Directors of Product Management here at Salesforce. They're going to dig in on how you can plan modular development projects, how this differs from the current org-driven development model, and share their vision for the future of development with Salesforce DX using developer-controlled packages, or DCPs. Really quickly, there's a slide many of you will be familiar with. It's our safe harbor slide. Before I begin, just take a quick note that when considering future developments, whether by us or with any other solution provider, you should always base your purchasing decisions on products and features that are currently available. The key takeaway for this slide is Salesforce is a publicly traded company. Please make buying decisions only on the products currently commercially available from Salesforce. We're going to be talking about things that are coming down the road. Don't make your purchasing decisions based on those statements. Also, we are on social media. Please keep the conversation going. You can find us on Twitter at Salesforce Devs. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, all under the Salesforce developers handles. When you're talking about this webinar today, please use hashtag SalesforceDX. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, please feel free to ask questions at any time during the presentation using the GoToWebinar questions window. We'll be answering these questions at the end of the presentation. And with that, let's get started. Take it away, John.
Hey, thanks, Chris. So we've got a great webinar planned for you all today. Here's our agenda. We're going to start out with an overview of Salesforce development. Now, for some of you on the line, you're probably going, oh boy. Well, it's important. There's some slides in here that we start off with in the beginning and we come back to them throughout. And it's important to compare what we're doing now to what we have been doing. So we're going to start with a bit of an overview. Then we're going to talk about how to approach adopting the Salesforce development experience. And this is getting into our new tooling, as well as new processes around developing modularly and towards packaging. So the third bullet point, we're going to talk about how to set up modular development and how to prepare yourself, and this is where we get into some of those forward-looking statements, how to prepare yourself for developer-controlled packages, which is a new feature that's going to be beta in the March spring release timeframe. Then we are going to talk a bit more about how you actually do that, preparing and migrating for projects and packages, as well as an important piece in that, which is managing org shape with scratch orgs. So let's dive right into this. So first off, we're going to talk about Salesforce Platform development. All right, so this is a model of what development looked like at a very high level and how you would do development and how you would run your development process before we introduced new Salesforce DX tooling. We really had two modes of operation. You have declarative development, and this is facilitated through change sets. And the idea was you did promotion of changes between environments all the way up to your production org. So we had sort of this declarative mode, and then we had a source-based mode as well. Now this one is facilitated through Metadata API, or more likely the Ant migration tool. And there you may have used the Salesforce Eclipse IDE as part of this process as well. But the idea here is you're still moving org diffs or changes through your development process, but you probably have a version control system involved. So you're able to externalize those changes through the Metadata API as source. So when we started to get into this, prior to getting into the Salesforce DX program, we asked ourselves, when we looked across this, where are the things that we can improve? What are the things that drive developers across platforms today. So when we entered into the planning process and the design process around Salesforce DX, we had a lot of things in mind. And I'll point out some of the core things right here. So number one, probably the first and foremost, is that everything is driven from source code. Now, as you saw on the previous slide, we said, well, you could integrate with a source control system. But what we're saying here is we're kind of doubling down on that. We want to not only let you externalize source, but we need to find a way to let you externalize all source. And this is something that we're working on today. We're going to continue working on. It's not something we've delivered with DX. It's going to be an ongoing thing where we keep filling out our APIs and closing gaps. We also want to make sure we integrate with any VCS tool that you like to use and build commands and tooling that make that experience simple. Furthermore, we wanted to provide new environments that allow you to more easily spin up, start doing your development as fast as possible. And then if you look over on the right, we have this area called flexible packaging. So this is where we're going to talk about developer controlled packages today. But what we are saying here is we wanted to provide a first-class release management system, something that is artifact driven and similar to what you see in other development experiences on other platforms. So with that, we built the Salesforce development experience. It's a source-driven, team collaborative focused, prescriptive process with a goal to get you all towards continuous delivery. That is our end game. If we are able to automate your entire development process so you can do continuous delivery to production org, we can call it a win. We can say that we've done our job here. And we are on the way to that. Open and prescriptive, I want to point that out. Open meaning you can use the tools that you want to use. One of the major things that we've brought into our planning and our design around our APIs and tools that we want to let you use the IDEs that you like. We want to let you use the version control system that you want, integrate your CI and CD tooling. We're going to find ways to enable you to use those tools that you have, but we're also going to build a more prescriptive process for you along the way. So it was more clear what commands you're meant to run, what tools you're supposed to use throughout the development experience. So to keep going on, to talk about the areas of investment that we got in and sort of map it around this development lifecycle. One of the major things that we built out first and foremost with Salesforce DX was our Salesforce DX CLI. Now this is really kind of part of the entire process. Should probably stick it in the middle next to version control, but it gets used mostly up front in kind of the dev process. At any rate, you use our CLI. And our CLI has an integration to everything that you need for development. So one thing to note about what we're doing here is instead of previously what you would do and say go to an API or use the app migration tool or then go to data API or maybe you need to do a sign up, we're trying to pull everything into the CLI. And by everything, I mean we're going to start adding, we've added lightning commands in there as well. For IoT, for Einstein, we're going to be working with those teams as well to start pulling more and more capabilities and features into this CLI so that this is the one place that you need to go to get your hands on everything related to Salesforce development. This includes obviously Heroku as well, as they have their own CLI already. We've also invested a lot in our IDEs. We did a rev to our Eclipse IDE, which is now moving towards open source. And then we did some really amazing things with VS Code. Then we have our Scratch orgs. This is our new ephemeral org that you can spin up quickly, load source into. This is used up front in the development process. As you move towards continuous integration and continuous delivery, you're going to be using sandboxes still. This is the area where you want to test the code that you had in your Scratch orgs in a sandbox that is a copy of your production environment. So when you think about Scratch orgs, you're really just working on a set of code, a specific module. And once you're done with that code, then you can push it up to your sandbox for testing. And then ultimately, you're going to have packaging. Now, this is something, like I said, is going to be beta in spring 18. And this is what you'll use for release management when that is available. So as I showed that first screen, I talked about declarative development and source-based development. Now this image is sort of a drill down into source-based development. So the top line is what we call org-based development. This is what you have been doing prior to the new SFDX workflow. Okay, this is a development model that is based on moving org diffs up through an org promotion process until it gets to your production org. What we're working on with Salesforce DX is enabling a modular development process. So you can break up your code, store all of that code related to a specific module in a version control system, and you work on that with Scratch orgs, and then you build that and promote that through the orgs toward the left as you're going through your continuous delivery process. And the idea here is you're promoting the entire module and you're building versions of this module the entire time. This is a bit different, and the thing to point out here is that you're developing towards the module, not towards the org anymore. So let's talk about adopting Salesforce DX. There's 3 things that we want you to look into and consider. First and foremost is just start looking at migrating to the Salesforce DX CLI. This is a great way to get an understanding of what we've been building, and it's also the right investment because, as I said, this is where we are going to put all of your development tooling. This is kind of your new development API, if you will. So this is your one-stop shop. You won't have to go anywhere else. You could migrate your Ant tasks or your Metadata API tasks. If you were previously running tests through the tooling API, you can run them now through the Salesforce DX CLI. You can automate everything here, which is why we advocate that you move here. One of the other big things, the Salesforce DX CLI has great authentication models. We have a web authentication flow, which is much better than what you would see in the Ant tool, which basically says throw your usernames and passwords in a config file. Not a good thing. So we have a nice web authentication flow, and we have a nice headless flow with the JWT bearer token capability. So migrating the DX CLI is the right thing to do because that's where we're investing. The next thing to look at is continuous integration and delivery. So if you haven't thought about just automating what you do today, start to go through the process and see how you can use the CLI to automate certain things like tests, deployments, environment creation. Automation and repeatable tasks will produce a much higher quality release process. You'll be testing kind of your release the entire way. So getting into CI and CD is really important. The last thing on here, but certainly not least, is really preparing for modular development and starting to figure out how to do modular development with projects, Scratch orgs, and DCPs. The reason to get into this is because at the end of this, you will have greater release agility, greater dev productivity, because working in modules and separate projects will free up your teams so they're not building towards that one org release, which you typically find in the org-based development process. So getting into the details of these again, migrating to the CLI, this is things like Metadata API, user auth. The benefits are clear, more secure authentication, improved scripting. This is where we are investing. So migrating to the CLI is a really, really great first step in getting involved. Automate testing and release management. Seeing how you can take your dev flows and really getting them automated and repeatable is also a really important step to improving overall quality and developer productivity and having quality releases. All right, so let's talk about modular package development. Kind of see over on the left, I would call that the big unpackaged space of your org, and what you're seeing on the right is Cody pulling that thing apart and building up new modules. So we're going to talk about how you can go ahead and do that. So as I said before, we have a declarative process and a source-based process. And within that source-based process, we give you two options. You can do org-based development and package development. So what is org-based development? This is change management by tracking org diffs. You are trying to figure out the differences between two sandboxes before you promote changes from one environment to another. You're trying to figure out, after you've integrated a whole bunch of changes from different developer sandboxes to one area, how to then build up that next package XML, which represents all of those changes. And all those things get pulled together in a release that is specific to a production org, right? You might have several teams working on several projects whose code modifications don't really relate to each other. But because of the way that we have our release set up right now, you're kind of forced to pull that stuff together into one big deployment to the production org to make sure you can manage your risk correctly, manage the release right. And then when that stuff is deployed, all the metadata that's stored in the production org is stored in this unpackaged area, meaning that it's just in the org. You kind of had this ad hoc release and there's just change to the prod org. So if you look at it, you'll just see new things there. You don't really have a semblance or an idea that those new things were related to this project or related to an app, or how, you know, and have a good understanding, say, compared to an app exchange package of what is all related to each other. So the key takeaways here are differences are tracked manually. Org diffs are the things that you version control. The release schedules are around the production org, and the release artifact that you create, these are just the diffs to the production org. And everything that you see and do is enabled through the metadata API. Development, release management, everything is through two commands. Nothing really prescriptive there. That's what we meant to change with source-driven development, with package development and Salesforce DX. So we're building these things called developer-controlled packages. These are containers for transporting entire modules of metadata components to your org. These things have an intention. Maybe this is an application. Maybe this is a library of something. And the nice thing about these is they're durable modules. They will be seen in your production org. When you release them, as opposed to what you do today, you'll see these in your production org. They'll stay there forever. It's not going to be a change set that disappears after a while. You'll be able to see this organization in your production org, and you have an understanding of how the org is made up. And the releases can then be pulled apart. Instead of just building a release by release for your production org, you can build releases around new package versions. And you can really separate the process and streamline it and have a more agile release. So with this case, you'll notice the big difference here is we have very prescriptive commands for the code and build process, and this is through force, source, push, and pull. And this will allow you to automatically track things and help you to integrate your changes into the version controlled project. And all of the metadata for your package is always there. And then when you get into build, test, and release, you're building a new package version. So you're not just saying, what are the diffs? What are the things that I have to compile? What are the differences? It's not that. You just literally build the next version of your package, and you will install that or upgrade that into these higher level sandboxes to then start testing release management. So we have a very specific set of commands that are nice and prescriptive for release management related to packaging. So this ties it all together, and you have a very prescriptive enterprise development process for development and release management. And this is going to help you in lots of ways. You'll have a simplified CI and CD system. You'll have artifacts, packages. Packages are the artifacts. Artifacts that you can track through your version control system that are also seen then in the production org. So you have improved audit, improved change management. Your your developer productivity and release management should be improved dramatically if you can start to pull this stuff apart into lots of modules and packages to deliver, because you can separate these things then. You can have teams working on their own delivery schedules instead of one big org delivery. Also have dependency management with these packages. So if one thing is dependent on another, not only will we be able to manage those dependencies on installation, but you'll be able to define them at development time, and you'll see a reflection of that in your version control system, where projects will relate to other projects and packages relate to other packages. So in the end, we're going to start getting into how you prepare for developer controlled packages. And I want to leave you with this. Where we are at GA is module development, which means in your code, in the code and sort of test code and build area right now, you can use force source push and pull to interact and develop your module. But once you get into build and release management and your testing and CD, you're still using metadata API, and that's just for now. That's why the source convert command is there. So you convert back to metadata API so you can build that package, which is the release artifact. And that's just for now. Coming soon, you're going to have package development available to you. So you'll still do the same things that you're doing now, which is why we're saying you can get started with module development. You'll still do the same things up front with force push and pull. But then when you start to go through the release process, you'll be building package versions and you'll be installing packages. So you'll be able to start playing around with this in spring 18. This is when the DCPs will be in beta. And I'm going to pass this over to Dilip.
Thanks, John. The great thing about all the stuff that John said is with Salesforce DX, we're making the two things that are very important as takeaways. One is you can adopt Salesforce DX in an incremental fashion. And second, Salesforce DX strongly promotes modular development. At this stage, you might be thinking, you know what, this is all great. I love this. I can see the vision. I can see how DX is beneficial. But how do I get started? How do I move from the current system of development where all of my metadata is present as a mass of unpackaged metadata? And how do I transition into this modular approach that John's talking about? How do I construct DX projects? How do I bring in packages into the mix? And if you pause for a moment and look at how your production org looks, in some sense, this depicts how your organization and metadata looks. You have a set of installed AppExchange apps, and the rest of your metadata is present in what we sometimes call the happy soup or the unpackaged metadata. Most of you might already know that when you install an AppExchange app, you're actually installing a managed package. So your Salesforce partners are already using the modular package-driven approach. And what we are doing as part of Salesforce DX is providing that modular development model in the form of developer control packages to not only partners, but also to our enterprise customers. So with the modular package development approach, the great thing is all the stuff that John spoke about constructing your metadata and your customizations in the form of DX projects can be applied here. And now you can start constructing developer control packages. And the great thing here is you don't have to adopt this in one shot. You can do this gradually. So as I'm showing here, you can start looking at related set of metadata in your unpackaged mass and start constructing developer control packages using them. And at this point, as you start adopting this, we expect that in 6 months or 8 months time, your organization would look something like this. You have a set of installed AppExchange apps. You have most of your metadata organized into well-structured developer control packages that for which you can even express dependencies. And then you might still leave behind some of the unpackaged metadata because they are legacy or they are difficult to unwind. And again, at this point, you might be wondering, this is all great. I get the vision. I get to know how I can go constructing this. do you have any guidelines to us in terms of how we can start identifying metadata that we can start migrating into a package? What fits in? Should I take everything that's there in my organization and put it into a single large developer control package? Do you have any guidelines for us? And here are some of the best practices that we have come up with after interacting with a lot of customers. Try to identify metadata that represents an app. Maybe you have built an expense management app that is in-house. Maybe you have a materials requisition app or an account receivables app. It makes so much sense to take the metadata that represents that app and pull it into a DX project and eventually to a developer control package. There are many customers that have heavily customized Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, and you can start looking at those extensions or those customizations as a DX project or as a package. The third thing that is very popular is a lot of you have taken an App Exchange app and have heavily customized it. Now, those customizations can become good candidates for these packages. And finally, you might say, you know what, I'm building a brand new app in the next quarter, and I'm going to use DX end-to-end for getting started and learning how it is and start placing all those metadata into this. So these are some of the strategies by which you can start organizing your unpackaged metadata into packages. But we have some best practices as well. When you start looking at this metadata as good candidates, keep in mind that they are fairly well related. You want to put a related set of code and customizations and metadata into a package. Try to have smaller packages versus larger packages as it's easier to iterate. One of the tests is to validate whether you can independently deploy these components. Can you spin up a scratch org and push metadata related to this single package? That's a good test to know whether you've got the right set of metadata. Finally, packages are deployment units. So you may want to think in terms of, is this something that we want to release independently? Is this something that a team of developers in our group, in our company are working together that is easier to organize us like this? And finally, source components can only exist in one project at a given point in time. Having said that, if you feel you have incorrectly structured them, it's fairly straightforward for you to move this metadata from one package to another package. So I hope these guidelines help. We have Trailblazer communities. We would love to hear from you in terms of how you look at this. So beyond this webinar, we would love to stay engaged with you in terms of strategies as well as challenges that you're facing as you start breaking up your large org into well-defined modular packages. Here are some of the anti-patterns that you've learned from working with you. Things that don't work are trying to take the entire org into a single project. It is too complex, it's too cumbersome, and it's not going to give you the kind of efficiencies that you want with a quick iterative development model. Be careful with respect to how you handle shared metadata, whether it is schema, whether it is Apex. It's better to start putting shared metadata into one common project and have other projects and packages depend on them. This is the same thing around shared objects as well as schema. So if you go back to this chart, you can see how a lot of things that you can start doing right now with respect to modular development will pave way for adopting packages when they become open beta in Spring 18. So all the stuff around using scratch orgs, creating DX projects, using source push and pull and retrieve and deploy can all pave way for you to using packages as a deployment unit for distributing and managing your metadata. In terms of the other thing that I'm really interested in talking to you is about org shape. So when we start talking about org shape, let's set the stage in terms of what are the challenges, like why are we talking about org shape? By org shape, we mean the shape of the org that you want to construct in your scratch org to help you in development. This is not related to metadata, but it's around asking questions like, should I enable multi-currency? Should IDS be turned on? Do I want chatter feeds to be in an enabled state or a disabled state? today, you can specify this org shape by creating the correct Scratch definition files, and in the Scratch definition file, you can specify the edition, the features, and preferences. All of this is working fine. But we have encountered a few challenges from early feedback that we have received from you. One is, it's very difficult to specify all features and preferences, especially if you're a non-partner. And many customers have told us, here's our production org, we have all the metadata there. I don't know all the things that are turned on there. Why don't you just give me all the settings that exist in my production org, and I want to spin up a Scratch org with the same shape as my production instance. The second challenge is not every feature is available for you to declaratively define in Scratch org, at least as of winter 18, while we are continuing to work on it. So how are we fixing this? The way we're fixing this is we will continue to offer more and more features in the Scratch org definition. But in addition to this, we're running what we call the org shape pilot, where you can specify a production org and say, I want to take a snapshot of the current shape of that org, and then start spinning up Scratch orgs by specifying that create a Scratch org that has the same shape as this org. And we strongly believe that that's going to help you in terms of how you spin up Scratch orgs, in terms of how you push and pull metadata and do the DX end-to-end. So you can see that both developer control packages and org shape are things that are very closely on the horizon. So as you can see in this milestone, both of these are going to get to an open beta in spring 18, and we plan to take them to GA in summer 18. In summary, again, all of the stuff that we currently have, you can get started, do a lot of modular development, and then start taking advantage of developer control packages and org shape once they become available in spring 18.
Thank you so much, Dilip. So we've learned a lot about Salesforce DX and how to create modular development practices with using Salesforce DX. If you're interested in learning all about getting hands-on learning, applying these technologies and techniques, please be sure to check out the continuous integration using Salesforce DX Trailhead badge. You can find that at trailhead.salesforce.com. And with that, we're ready to start getting into Q&A. We have a ton of questions, you guys. So we're going to try to do our best to get through them. We've got a good 23 minutes to walk through them. If we have leftover questions at the end, we'll see if there's some way we can potentially get some of Dilip and John's time to address some of these questions. And with that, I'm just going to jump right into it. So Dilip, there's a big question here. I'm going to try to consolidate as best I can. How is Salesforce DX going to handle Scratch orgs that are being used for development of extension or integration packages that must be installed in the Scratch org, especially when the package providers are unwilling to provide package IDs or install links to the process, or the process to install is complicated, for example, Financial Force. Ideally, you could use an existing org to clone the installed packages. That's a question. Sorry, that was kind of a weirdly worded question. So far, there's been a blocker for our team using Salesforce DX. So it's a lot to unpack there. I'll give you a moment to kind of walk through that.
Thanks, Chris. So this has been a pain point up to winter 18, and I even had a lot of participants come and talk to me during Dreamforce about this. I'm happy to announce that we have fixed this, but before we talk about this, let me give you a bit of a context. So today, you may have a production org where you have installed packages for years. I mean, there may be a package that you installed, in this example from Financial Force, 2 years ago, and you're wondering, how do I start doing development on our customizations on top of this package, because I don't know how to install this package, and I have to spin up Scratch orgs with these packages installed. In winter 18, we offered a CLI command called package installed list that you can run against your production org, and when you do that, we show you not only the list of all packages that you have installed, but also the 04T IDs, which we call the package version IDs. And with those IDs, you can issue a force package install CLI command to install any of the packages that you want into the Scratch org. In addition to this, we are thinking about how we can, in future releases, improve this experience of pulling together a subset of packages that you have in your production org and do customizations and extensions in a more seamless form. I hope that answers the question.
Great. And I think it's a related question. The question is, if modules are dependent, how do you manage the dependencies between modules?
So with developer control packages that we will be, that is currently there as a pilot in winter 18 and beta in spring 18, you can declaratively define dependencies between your packages. So you can say that this accounts receivables package that I'm building has a dependency on a common library module. And we will enforce those dependencies. And what you will do is in scratch arcs, when you are spinning up the scratch arc, you'll install the dependent packages and then the packages that it depends on, all through CLI commands. And since all of these things can be done via CLI, you can end-to-end automate them using scripting.
Great. And Chris, there's also a question about the Salesforce CPQ Steelbrick, which is related. I thought I'd kind of go to that one now. Do you see that?
Yeah. So the question is, we are using Salesforce CPQ, formerly known as Steelbrick. It's a managed package. Spinning off a scratch org requires to pull metadata from an unmanaged package. Pulling managed components into unmanaged is not possible. We have customizations around CPQ. What can I do to customize CPQ by utilizing DX going forward?
Right. So I think this speaks to a couple things. So Dileep's answer before, and this question we saw about financial force, is absolutely related. The path here is to provide a way for you to install the managed package again into your scratch org. And that means, as part of this, the metadata that is modified as part of the installation, those are things that you're going to want to then track as part of your extension. That way you can mimic the installation and the setup that you have in your production org. And this will all be in your source. So you'll have the package that's installed, and then you'll have your extension module, which will become a package that has the overrides that were, or the changes that were part of installation, and then whatever extensions that you have there. So this idea, the thing that's written in here, which concerned me a little bit, which says the scratch org requires to pull metadata from unmanaged. And so we have some stuff in our documentation that talk about using the unmanaged package interface to help you to create a Salesforce DX project. And that's all it is. So if you're looking at that documentation and you're saying, wow, they want me to use an unmanaged package, we want you to take advantage of the unmanaged package interface just as a means to help bootstrap the process of creating a project. It just helps you to extract stuff out of your org. But if you're talking about a managed package, you're right. We don't want to do it that way. If it's a managed package, you have to install that in your scratch org first, and then you'll use force-sourced push to move your extensions around that package into the scratch org. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, and to add to what John said, that may be a good candidate for you to then start putting in your modular DX project and then to develop a control package, this set of customizations that you're talking about that you made to this installed managed package. So then once you do that, in subsequent versions, you will start installing the managed package of an external partner and then install your developer control package that represents the extension, and then you're ready to start doing development.
Great. We have a question about decomposition of large orgs into modules or packages, I believe. So the question is there an approach to breaking down a big production org, for example, FSC, communities for both customer and partner, and Service Cloud with many customizations via Apex into Salesforce DX projects? I have not found an approach to assist with this. I'm really struggling. Yeah, so that's what we were trying to get at a high level during this this webinar. So I think there's the approach to migration is a gradual one. The approach to adoption is a gradual one. So again, I know this isn't specific to this question, but I'm going to say it again. One of the things just to start with is think about just adopting the CLI. That'll get your feet wet. You can start transitioning your current process to the CLI, and you'll really start understanding how that works. The next step is thinking about this, which is how do I start to create modules? And I think what we need to do, especially now, since we're before
developer-controlled packages are available even in a beta. What you're going to be looking for are particular modules that you can break apart from your org, which can work well with the processes currently GA. And the bread and butter, the best case scenario here is that you can pull apart a completely distinct application. Now that isn't the case for everyone. So, but what we say is you want to try to start pulling apart projects that minimize the number of dependencies and things that are shared to start. But once DCPs are available and we have a nice dependency capability, you'll be able to take on more of that complexity in your development process. So Dilip and I are going to be working on some blogs that try to dive into this a bit more and to talk about, and it will speak to components that historically are shared components and how you can work to split them apart. And we're going to talk about objects in that blog. We're going to talk about an approach to breaking apart triggers and things like that. So I think we'll just ask that you keep an eye out for that. I think our approach between now and Trailhead DX is to continue doing webinars like this so we can get the messaging out and back it up with content and blogs and other material that really help you dive in and understand how to split things apart. So we'll be helping you with this.
Yep. And to add to what John said, it's a bit of an art and a science in the sense that it's a very subjective question in terms of how you break this apart. And as John said, we'll have best practices, we'll have blogs, but we are really looking forward to your experience with this as you go along. So please feel free to reach out to us, come to our Trailblazer community, post your feedback, thoughts, your challenges, and we would love to work with you one-on-one when it comes to some of these challenges so that it's a mutually learning experience for us and for you.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks, John. So here's a question that's going a little different direction, moving a little bit away from scratch orgs. The question is, instead of scratch orgs, can you talk a little bit about existing development methodologies using Salesforce DX with sandboxes?
Yeah, so the methodology there, we had a slide that basically showed the org-based development that's facilitated through Metadata API. So that's how you do things today. And you usually do that with a combination of the AMP migration tool and probably callouts to the data API to facilitate your development process. So if you're switching to the CLI and you still want to use, say, your current sandbox process, if it's the org-based development process like I was describing, you would just switch to the force metadata API topics and those commands, as well as the force data topic and those commands. We should have everything that you need there to help manage the use of your sandbox and setting up your sandbox.
Awesome, thank you. Here's a question about just package management. With Salesforce DX, can we uninstall a modular package?
Right now, when it comes to developer control packages, you will have capabilities to uninstall a package using the CLI sim command, similar to how you can install. I hope that answers the question.
Great, great. Is there a suggested limit for the size of a package?
Right now, the packages are going to be limited by the same limits that we have around Metadata API, which is it's a pretty high limit, to be honest, probably more than we'd want someone to get into. The idea around this is to really be breaking things down into smaller, more manageable packages / modules that should make your development process a bit easier. For instance, we do not recommend, we don't want anyone going after this and saying, oh, I'm going to just extract my entire org. Even if it's a small org, that's not really the intention, and it would get away from the idea of what a module and packaging is about. If you're extracting your entire org, then you're not really putting an intention to the module. It's just your org. And by intention, I mean, you really want to say, hey, here's this application that I'm developing. Here's this set of extensions that I'm developing. Maybe here's the extensions for this specific sales team that I'm customizing. The module and package should have a specific intention and meaning to you, and it shouldn't just be the org.
Awesome. So here's a question about packaging 2, also known as second generation packaging, and developer control packages. Basically, the question is, what's the difference between packaging 2 and developer controlled packaging?
Okay, so packaging 2 is an umbrella term that we're using for different types of packages that we're offering both for Salesforce partners and enterprise customers. Developer controlled packages is a very customer-oriented package that we have designed specifically keeping in mind many of the challenges and use cases around enterprise customers using packages as a modular development approach.
Great. Another question, another short one here. Is there any reason not to use a dev hub in production? The fact that you can't turn it off is concerning to us.
Yeah, so the developer hub enablement is really just giving you access to Scratch.org licenses. That's what that does. That's all that it does. So the moment you enable the dev hub, you are then given access to a set of licenses. You're able to then create Scratch orgs and to work through some of these development processes that we've described. So if you enable dev hub and then you don't want to use SFDX, then you just choose not to use these features. You don't need to create a Scratch org, and that's really there. So I don't think it should be anything concerning. It's just an enablement to then let you create an org elsewhere to do development. So it doesn't really do anything to your production org other than give you access to licenses.
Awesome. We have a ton of questions, guys, so I apologize. It's taking us a little bit to kind of sort through them. Another question about metadata that we have is, what if multiple apps need to use the same metadata?
So in scenarios where you want to use multiple, where there is shared metadata, as I was showing in my slides, it makes a lot of sense to extract the shared metadata into a separate DX project, put it in the developer control package, and have other packages that you're building depend on that metadata. So shared modules are very well supported in DX, and you can set them up in a DX, in a common DX project and a common developer control package.
Great. So DCPs are a great method and concept. How easy is it to select components into the individual package? Do I continue to use unmanaged package to select components as it is today?
To some extent, as you start looking at how you can identify or extract a set of data into a well-defined package, we have suggested that you use change set or an unmanaged package to just easily identify and use the Salesforce spidering process to pull it in. But you'll see that as you start adopting developer control packages and as you start building functionality, that's more of a one-time task. And as you start building new features, they will naturally fit into interrelated developer control packages.
Great. So here's the question about Trailhead. Are there any Trailhead modules which will guide us to migrate to the to the managed packages? I don't think we have those yet, do we?
Yes. So we are working on a Trailhead module for Spring 18 that is geared towards developer control packages and how customers can adopt developer control packages in the context of Salesforce DX. So we will be sharing information as we get close to that date.
So here's a question about licensing. Are there any additional licensing costs if we use this technology to develop our Salesforce app?
No. So at this point, what the capabilities of doing modular development or even creating DCPs are features that are just provided with the development experience at Salesforce. So the licensing and potential cost there is really around environment usage, just as it is today. So just to go in there in case there's another question I haven't seen yet, scratch orgs are bundled into your edition, and we did a lot of work in trying to figure out a large set of entitlements that we would give to customers across enterprise and unlimited edition for their scratch orgs, so that out of the box they could adopt and start working with these, and for lots of projects and CI and CD. You know, if you go past that, there's a cost to us, and that's where we look to sell licenses there to cover our costs. So the only thing that you'll be spending on is more environments if you are just expanding your usage into your development.
Great. Here's a question about managed package dependencies. How do scratch orgs handle managed package dependencies? For example, a trigger that references a field in NPSP.
As John was talking about this, the way you would do this is you will install interdependent packages using CLI commands, using the force package install command, and anything outside of the package will already be there in a DX project that you will do a source push to. So between those two things, you will be able to cover any metadata. It's either present in a package, in which case you're going to deploy it using the force package install command, or it's unpackaged metadata that you're working with, for which you'll use the source push and pull mechanism.
Great. Here's a question about version control. Does Salesforce DX have its own version control system, so we need not rely on an external system like Subversion or Git?
The idea right now is that you would integrate with your own version control system. We want to provide that choice. Most of the customers that we've talked to wanted that capability. So what we do is we provide an integration through our source commands to extract the source from the org, or through metadata API, depending on how you're bootstrapping, and then you can work with whatever version control system you want. That's where we're at with that. Yeah.
Great. Here's a question about metadata and kind of transitioning from basically pilot to production. Can the org shape pilot copy metadata from a production org?
The org shape is right now defined around features, preferences, settings. That's what the org shape is going to find. Metadata should be coming from either the package that you're developing, the module that you're developing, so that should come out of source, or if you're extending a managed package, there's an installation that would get the metadata into the scratch org there. So if there's something, please let us know if there's something that we're missing there. There was some nuance that we discussed with some customers actually recently about extending managed packages. And I'll say one thing that we're going to write as a best practice for extending a managed package is when it comes to data within the managed package that can be subscriber controlled. You know, up to date, some people are just editing things that are directly within the namespace of that managed package, reports, page layouts. A lot of our partners will tell their customers already that as a best practice, they'd like you to just copy or clone those things anyways to make it your own, sort of outside of their namespace. And we recommend the same thing, because without that capability, without doing that copy or clone, you can't control that metadata within your package and your module, because it still lives in their namespace. You can control it. It's just a little bit more cumbersome. So the best practice is leave that managed package as is and build around it.
Awesome. Well, hey, we are just about out of time, folks. Thanks so much for sticking around and asking all these great questions. There were a ton, and I apologize we couldn't get to all of them. What I would ask you to do is, if there are questions that went unanswered, please go to the developer forums. It's developer.salesforce.com/forums. Ask your questions there. Are you guys also monitoring the Trailblazer community, Dilip?
Yes, very much.
Great. So the Salesforce DX Trailblazer community is another great place to have these kinds of conversations. With that, we are all out of time. Again, thank you so much, Dilip. Thank you so much, John. we'll look forward to seeing you guys and everybody who joined the webinar at our next one. Thanks so much. Have a great day.